Welcome to Happily Ever After is just the beginning. Keeping your relationship not just together, but happy, and we mean truly happy, is part art and part science. You've come to the right place. Here's your host, Leslie Dories.
Fairy tales start out once upon a time and end they lived happily ever after. The implication is that all problems are resolved between the beginning and that wonderful end. Never a word about how the story looks 5, 10, or even 20 years down the road. And mostly the skills that got the characters through the hard times, fencing, fighting, chases, escapes, etc., don't help with the humdrum everyday stuff most couples face. So, with a tip of the hat to William Goldman, how can you keep true love alive without needing a miracle? So to help answer that question, I'm joined by writer and speech-language pathologist Jonathan Morris Schwartz. So Jonathan, thanks so much for being on the show and talking about true love.
Indeed. Thanks so much for having me. And I wish I had the secret to true love. I would certainly be able to categorically expose that to everybody. But I appreciate being on. I look forward to talking with you today.
So you're a fellow writer for the Good Men Project, which I recommend everybody check out. It's a great website. And your recent piece, Love is Not a Fairy Tale, caught my attention. And in the piece, you talk about a lover's catch-22. So what exactly is this?
Well, what I'm getting at with that, from my opinion, is that when it comes to love, in those early stages, when we initially have the butterflies and the attraction, and it's determined that it's a mutual attraction, there comes a point where you have to become vulnerable, where you have to give it your all. And true love only, in my opinion, exists when it starts out with that explosive attraction. And that's a debate unto itself. And that's, again, in my judgment, in my opinion, that's the genesis, that's the beginning, that's the spark. And for me, in my personal experience, and to be very, very transparent from the start, I have been divorced. I've had a couple of relationships. I haven't had a lot of loving relationships, but the ones that I've had have been fairly longish term, let's say. One was 7 years and one was 13 years. But both of them started out in that initial stage where basically you surrender everything. You trust the person. You hope it's going to last forever. You're afraid. You have all the emotions and excitement and adrenaline. But the catch-22 is, to be precise about it, is that you have to be vulnerable. You have to put your heart on the table if you're going to experience love. And by putting your heart on the table, you're vulnerable and you're taking the risk of it being chopped up because you may lose the love. If they leave you, you're left with all your eggs in that basket. As I said in the article, you lose your eggs and your basket. Maybe you can lay more eggs, but the basket's gone, to stretch the metaphor further.
Right.
And so,
I mean, yeah,
go ahead.
It's an interesting concept because when we fall in love, it's a complex process that a lot of people don't fully understand everything that's going on with that. But it's also somewhat a simple process. I mean, and suddenly we're in this world where we notice the birds singing and colors are brighter, and we can stay up all night and do all those fun things. That our bodies just can't keep doing, but And I know that one of the things that comes into play, and I don't know how this plays into the catch-22 and the eggs all in one basket, but this idea that, at some point in time, this perfect person is not going to seem so perfect. And then what? Is that kind of what you mean by, the vulnerability?
Yes. I mean, absolutely. I think to splice it a little, to nuance it a little bit, I think we cognitively, we want someone to love forever. We don't go into love hoping it doesn't last. We go into it hoping it lasts, and that we'll grow old with this person. That's our fantasy. That's our desire. But biologically, we crave, we're animals. We crave that wild, uninhibited romance and passion and sex, frankly. And so, in terms of like what you're saying, the catch-22, besides just being vulnerable, allowing yourself to be vulnerable, is to accept that the biological side of us, and that sort of leads to a whole bunch of other topics. But I think with the catch-22, in terms of that particular topic that phrase that I'm coining or using, there's only three things that we sort of end up with at the tail end of this, of the honeymoon stage, let's say, when we could be in what we call the catch-22, where the love is not as you say, as bright as it once was. One would be to acknowledge that love and sex reside on different planets, and just and just embrace it, and just maybe try out, look, I'm 55 years old. I have younger children, 20 and older, of course. But, I mean, the Generation Z, and it'll be interesting what Generation Alpha does next, they are experimenting and embracing different lifestyles, multiple partners, open marriages. There's a lot that's different than when I grew up, when it was pretty black and white and pretty puritanical. So one possibility is to get through this catch-22 is that, people say, look, I love you, but I want to have sex with other people, and they find a way to navigate that and make that happen, and to everyone's satisfaction. It's not for me. Maybe I'm too old. Maybe I'm too old school. Maybe I'm too jealous. Maybe I'm too egotistical. Maybe I'm too whatever it is. I have not been able.
Right, and that's not necessarily an easy transition, although I'm like you, I'm very interested in seeing what's coming in the next generation.
Oh, absolutely. I think so. If somebody out there listening or anyone is interested in sort of exploring different types of definitions of love, then that's one opportunity. The second would be, which is what a lot of people do, which is to cheat and lie about it. I mean, you satisfy your biological animalistic needs with other people, and you do what they did, and I guess many generations, which is cheat and hope you never get caught. And then the final thing is what I call a diet of the sex mind, I guess you would say, which is just say no. I mean, which is just, temptation's temptation. Recognize the temptation and have the strength and the morality and the ethics and the principles. And when I start talking like that, I hear my own little inner voice saying, you're sounding so judgmental of people. We're all human. We all fall short. So by no means am I saying that I'm necessarily number three, the guy who resists temptation. Right. Nobody's perfect. But let's be honest, people who are married for 50 or 60 years, who are monogamous and who don't cheat, I can't imagine they didn't have temptation in 50 years. So my husband and I say we're married, we're not dead. So Right. Right. So, obviously there are people who have found ways, and as you know, I'm not a professional, I'm not a counselor, but I know that, and I know you are, and I think that, there are people who have found ways to navigate being loyal and monogamous, and again, that's how I grew up. That was the goal, and if you fell short, I think that's a lot of what I think about these days, though, with the catch-22 is, are we evolving from what I call the old-fashioned ways to what is, the new way of doing things, where is it possible, and again, it's hard to wrap your head around this, but is it possible that we're going into an age when the idea of marriage between two people changes? And we have gay marriage now, but is the next, and I'm not talking about slippery slope stuff, but is the next step, two couples or allowing for, allowing for different explorations, basically.
So so actually this kind of leads into the next question that I wanted to ask, because I'm wondering if there's some connection here, because you go on to say in the article that we all settle for less than we deserve. So for all the romantics whose souls just got crushed, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I reread my article in preparation for this, the whole article, of course, and that particular section, I probably could have been slightly more artful. I stand by it. I'm not trying to backpedal, but it took me a little while to be able to really explain this, and the best I can do in 60 seconds is, we all deserve, and I hope I can articulate this, I'm going to try, we all deserve a fairy tale romance. We all deserve it. Who doesn't deserve it? And we deserve one that lasts forever. But and I hope this doesn't sound crude, but it doesn't matter what we deserve. We don't get what we deserve a lot of times. Wouldn't it be nice? I mean,
right.
But what we deserve has no bearing on who falls in love with us. I mean, we can wish it all we want. If we could choose who loves us, we would get what we deserve. And I mean, so I think what I mean by settling is really more being realistic. And the word settle is loaded, and it seems it's when you say you settled for your husband or wife, no one says that in a way where you're like, oh, thank you so much. I mean, it sounds
have a positive connotation to it.
It sure does. No. So, and I put the word settle in parentheses in the article, but really, I think I probably would have done better to say be realistic, and even that's loaded because we deserve the best, right? But I think, and I don't know how to say it properly, we have to be realistic about love, and I'm careful because when I tried to prepare this, what it ends up sounding like is I'm saying, don't go for somebody outside of your league. Stay in your own lane. Stay in your own socioeconomic, educational lane, and I don't mean that at all. I don't mean that at all. What I mean, love who you, if a bird could love a fish, it would be great. But so my feeling is just be realistic about what exists about the love itself and what's real, and that's as close as I could come on that one. I will admit to your audience, I would finesse this a little in a rewrite, to be honest. But I stand by it. I do think we tend to sometimes over-exaggerate the possibilities.
Well, I mean, and this kind of goes back to this concept of we're not dealing with a fictional character. We're dealing with a flesh and blood human being that, has their own viewpoint, baggage, triggers, whatever we want to talk about, that and this is one of the challenges of, when we get out of that hormonally driven kind of, in love rush that our bodies literally cannot stay in.
The honeymoon stage.
The honeymoon phase, and then to be able to see a more complete version of the person who's in front of us with, strengths, flaws, quirks.
Absolutely.
That I think when you talk about settling, I'm wondering if maybe, and I'm being more realistic, that instead of settling, it's more about choosing. Maybe that I'm choosing to accept this whole person, because I'm not a perfect person, so I'm hoping that this person accepts me for my quirks and my the weirdness that I bring to the table. And I think that may be one of the things that is a little bit scary for people in terms of being vulnerable, because if I show, my hand, if I show all my cards, will I get rejected? Right.
And I agree. I think the way you just said it is probably a better way of framing it, honestly, about making compromise and being able to accept reality and trade-off.
Yeah, and there's interestingly, because we can somewhat influence reality, we can't actually change it, but we can bring a different perspective to it, that because like we said, we can't change reality. Reality is what it is, and I think that's where some people get a little off track in this whole putting all the eggs in one basket kind of thing, that it's like, here's this person who's perfect, which first off, stop right there, and second off, who is always going to understand me. I don't have to explain myself. I don't have to apologize. I'm sorry, I'm dating myself in the love story. Love means never having to say you're sorry, kind of thing. These ideas that we get out there, and part of the reason why I love this is because you talked about love is not a fairy tale, but that's this vision that so many of us are given, that it's like, well, if it's the real thing, it is this fairy tale. And you're saying, no, there's reality that comes into this that we need to be prepared for, I think.
And that's the gist. That's the log line. That's the one-line synopsis. Really, is being able to navigate through the honeymoon, past it, in a metacognitive way, in an aware, self-aware kind of way, and then be able. I use the word settle. You can use the word accept. You could use whatever word works. For there's an old song: if you can't be with the one you love, love the one you're with. Now that's not exactly what I'm saying, but a little bit of it is. The metaphor stretches, but it's there in the sense of being able to navigate your way through the stages of love.
Gotcha.
And
so, This is Happily Ever After is just the beginning on webtalkradio.net. I'm Leslie Dories, and I'm talking love with writer and speech-language pathologist Jonathan Morris Schwartz. And if you struggle with true love, feeling like you're settling, or any other relationship woe, you're not alone. But with a little bit of knowledge and some improved skills, you can have a deeper, more fulfilling marriage. And if you want to know how to do that, I invite you to take a moment and send me an email or give me a call and schedule your free 5-star relationship consultation. You can reach me by email at Leslie, Lesli, at foundationscoachingnc.com. That's FOUNDATIONS, coaching, N as in Nancy, C as in Charlie.com. Or you can reach me by phone at area code 919-924-0463. Again, that's 919-924-0463. And I want to get back to this conversation with Jonathan, and love is not a fairy tale. So in your article, you use 2 words that most people would not put together: pragmatic and love, which we were talking about before the little break. So can you elaborate a little bit on those 2 words and why you put them together?
Sure. Pragmatic love, to me, in terms of how I'm describing it, is a bit, as close as I can say, is a bit of a trade-off, but it really means accepting, understanding, realizing, being aware of, and accepting the stages of the relationship, the genesis, the initial butterflies, the initial explosion, can't eat, can't sleep, think about them all the time, the fantasies about romance and all that, working your way into the, as you mentioned earlier in the show, that honeymoon stage itself where the colors are brighter and the birds are singing and you're zippity-doo-downing down the street and everything feels better and time moves perfectly. Time, stands still when it should and goes fast when it should and slows down when it should. But that comes to an end, and that at that point you commit to or you don't, to the deeper, more meaningful, lasting aspects of a loving relationship, and you find comfort and passion in building a home and a family and a life and all those things. I mean, like you, I'm not still married, but I was married 14 years and raised a family, so I know a lot of the aspects of what it means, that deep sense of security and belonging and connection and wholeheartedness. And so, I think pragmatic love, what I mean by that is be open-eyed, be wide-eyed, and clear about what love is in one lane, what sex and biological, physical pleasure is in another lane, that they overlap, they intersect. Right. They're part of the same product. They're part of the same thing, but that they're different, and that we're going to struggle with both. And at some point, what I mean by pragmatic is really ties into what I said before, and it sounds awfully conservative and old-fashioned, but pragmatic means making a decision that the deeper, longer love is more valuable, and doing all the things, all the moral and ethical things we were brought up to do. I'm very liberal, so when I hear myself sounding very conservative, I start to scold myself internally. When I hear myself sounding like my great-grandmother, not just my grandmother, but my great-grandmother, I try and rein it in.
Well, I mean, and I do think, and I don't know if you are familiar with Esther Perel, but
no.
She wrote a book. She's a marriage therapist, and she wrote a book many, many years ago called Mating in Captivity, which is about this push me, pull you kind of the security of being with somebody that you know and
yes.
you've built a life together, but then there's the erotic, there's this, there's the sensual, there's the sexual, and it's it's this it's this antagonistic forces on a relationship, and I think it's easy to go too far in either direction, where I
That's
think
right.
the challenge and really, talking about your great-grandmother, that finding I don't like using the word balance because that implies equal, but finding a way to have both. And you're not going to have perfection on either end when you're trying to combine, them.
Right.
And I think that your perspective here on this is really saying that in a different way. Is that I think a lot of people end up in the either or camp, and I'm always in the both and. It's like how do we get both? And
how do you reconcile both? Got it.
Yeah. So you actually also proposed a theory about love. So would you be willing to share what it is and what makes it more reasonable than maybe this fairy tale idea that we all, that people get caught up in?
Sure, and my love theory in the article, that was the summary, and that was basically always toward this. There was a little summary at the end that buttoned it up, but it was part of the summary. And so basically, I'll give you the short of it. It's nuanced, but it's pretty clear. True love only exists if you're willing to sacrifice something very important, yourself, and that's the catch-22. You got to put your heart on the line, or you're not going to have love. You can't have it both ways. You can't protect your heart and experience true love. You choose one or the other. When you give another human being complete control over your heart, mind, and soul, you're taking a gamble. We know that. When you tell someone you can't live without them, do you really mean it? Well, no. I mean, it's an expression of your feelings. But in terms of the actual theory itself, it comes down to knowing the stages and being aware of where you're at, and when the love seems to, part of the problem is we get so focused and almost paranoid and fearful in the early stages. When's it going to end? I love that. It's like when you're doing something and you're an ice cream cone. You don't want the last lick to ever occur.
Right.
But you've got to my theory is you've got to be willing to get on the roller coaster. I mean, you cannot be home in a shuttered house and love. The key is, number one, getting on the ride. If we're lucky, we've all had at least one Romeo and Juliet in our lives, and I think that we're not just supposed to pick a friend and slap the title love on it. I mean, that is settling. I mean, and that's what I was saying from before. So in order to reconcile it, in my opinion, and again, it boils down to a fairly conservative notion. I mean, and it is what it is, and I believe it. Whether I live it is a little different, but I believe it to be true, and that is once you both realize that you're no longer on fire with desire, that you are no longer can't eat, can't sleep stage, and you're now at a point where everything, the sensations are slightly more dull, and so forth, and the colors are slightly less. So once you're at that point, that you make a decision that the marriage is worth it, that all the aspects that we discussed, all the deeper meaning, is worth the sacrifice. And I say it as such. It sounds, I'm sure many will disagree with me when you say, what do you mean sacrifice? If you're married to someone, it's not a sacrifice not to have sex with the lady next door. That's what you're supposed to do. But that's my theory of love is conquering the temptation is not easy, and it's something that it doesn't come easy for everyone. And I think, but that's the bottom line. I take a hard stance on that, and I think, true love. I'm not someone. If I had to categorically come down on some of these new types of open relationships, and I've written articles on that. It's not that I'm against it. I'm liberal. I'm open. I'm progressive to anything. I don't want to close the door on anything, but I remain in the feeling that, again, if I have to really boil it down, if someone said, what's more important, love or sex, and you can only choose one?
Oh, gosh.
My answer is love. My answer is love. Now, that's not everyone's answer, Leslie. I don't know, or it may not be everyone's honest answer. But choose love. Choose it, and it's a conscious decision, and that's why I chose a picture of a couple that looks like in their 80s or 90s strolling in the article, because I think that's, the idea is as time goes by, eventually the love becomes a lifelong love, and it comes together. So it's not. I mean, the theory basically is accepting reality, accepting and being knowledgeable about what love is, what sex is, and then making a decision and doing your best to stick to it because it's worth it, because the marriage or the relationship is valuable and is worth the commitment.
Well, and part of that is and one of the things that I preach pretty much every week on the show is about, making, like you say, understand what it is and committing to having a conversation, to working through these things, as opposed to, just falling into habits that leaves one or both of you not quite so happy. And and I think that that's one of the things that maybe is what's going on with people today, is that if I put all my eggs in one basket, if I commit to this one person, this one relationship, there is FOMO, fear of missing out. I'm missing out on these other experiences. And that doesn't mean you can't bring you can't bring some of the concepts of those other experiences, but I think maybe a lot of this focus on these new kinds of relationships is because either people have never seen a solid relationship that's lasted for a long period of time, and that they see what works, because or they don't want to be hurt. I'm trying to protect myself from being hurt, and it's like you said, you got to get on the roller coaster. You got to get on the ride. I tell people, your partner is going to hurt you. The question is, are they doing it on purpose, or are they doing it from just a lack of, I didn't realize that my doing this would be a problem for you because, it just has never come up between the two of us. To me, that's a whole different thing than somebody intentionally hurting you. To me, that's just not loving and doesn't belong in any kind of relationship. But I
think the young folks I admire them in the sense that they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. They recognize, as you say, that they're going to have physical temptations, that they're going to not want to have all their eggs in one basket. They want to be smart about it, and so I don't blame them for wanting their cake and eat it too. I just am of the belief that you cannot have your cake and eat it too. So.
Yeah, I'm with you. Philosophically, morally, I'm not opposed to any of these things. And maybe it's just because I do what I do. I've just never seen it work.
There you go.
Because we, to me, the amount of emotional maturity it takes to be in a committed relationship to one person is high, and now you're starting to introduce other people. It's like, okay, more power to you if you can pull it off.
Exactly.
But we are, but then we have to be able to deal with our own demons, and that's usually where, all relationships hit the skids is because I haven't dealt with my own demons around this, whatever this might be.
That's true. And it may be that in the future there's a group of people who honestly can love more than one person at a time. I can't.
Right.
But it doesn't mean others can't. Right. I can't wrap my head around the notion of having multiple lovers or multiple wives or multiple anything, frankly, when it comes to love and sex. But again, I try to be progressive and reasonable and walk in other people's shoes enough to recognize that with all the things in the technology, we could touch on everything. We could go into sex robots. We could go into how technology and virtual. We could talk for hours. But staying with this nugget, with this precise topic, I think we basically we have a choice, and we have to make it, and whatever works. But I'm open to new possibilities, and it may be in 50 years nothing looks like it looks now in relationships and marriage.
Right, and I'm so glad that you talked about choosing, that we have to make a choice. And I think that's where, people, I want my cake and eat it too. I don't want to have to choose, because if I choose path A, whatever path A is, it means I'm not walking down path B. And that's what I think is happening, There's consequences to both of that. And I think that this idea of understanding the stages of love, which which I'm glad you mentioned that, because there are stages of love. It doesn't stay the same over time, but we also have, I believe, we have more input into what each stage looks like, that we don't necessarily have to give up all of the in love kind of stuff, but we have to find a way to make room
appreciate.
For that. Yeah.
I agree with every syllable you just said. I think we have to, again, I admire the young people for, we'll beat this metaphor to death, to want their cake and eat it too. Right. But I think, and again, just like you're saying, I think that's their way of trying to circle the square. They're very intelligent, this Generation Z. They're every generation seems to be getting smarter than the next, and I think they're trying to intellectualize and make sense of something that makes absolutely no sense. The word love and life and heaven and God and it's obscure. But I do admire the young people and I'm open. I haven't tried any of the newfangled stuff, but I am open and progressive enough to recognize that there may be a pathway that works. Again, as we've said now, in my judgment, I'm still of the impression that love is between two people who build a life together and make a commitment and stick to it until death they part. Simple. That's true love.
Yeah, simple, not necessarily easy. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on the show and providing this wonderful insight. Can you share with people where they might be able to read more of your musings?
Sure. I've been writing somewhat prolifically for about a year, about a few articles a week for about a year. So I've got about 200 articles on two different websites. One is medium.com. And all you do is www.medium.com and put in Jonathan Morris Schwartz, and there I am. And you'll see, I have almost 200 articles, and you can scroll through them, and I have different perspectives on love and romance. And the other is Substack, which is a newsletter, and that is one, it's free. It has an ability to be, you could charge people, but I don't. I have it on a free setting right now. So you could go to substack.com and read my newsletter as well if you'd like.
Perfect. Love does not have to die, but it does need room to grow and develop. Trying to recapture those first heady days of being in love will only lead to disappointment and resentment. But feeding and nurturing your love and allowing it to mature will pay big dividends. So hopefully one of the things that you will do to keep your love alive and growing is continue to listen to this show. And until next week, stay loving.